Good evening. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome to our breast health webinar tonight. I'm Krista Atwood, your host, and I will be talking to you about how we get through tonight right now. We will be recording this talk, so it will be made available over the next 2 weeks, and we will send details to you via email if you'd like to hear it again. I want to hand over tonight to Dr. Nyjon Eccles, who is an expert in his field and who will be talking in particular about the challenges that women and the medical world face over breast screening. Over to you, Nyjon.
Well, thank you very much, Krista, for the introduction. And I do hope you can all hear me. I must ask you to forgive me for the bit of croakiness in my voice. I've been struggling with a little bit of a viral challenge over the last few weeks, so apologies. I'll just have to croak my way through this as best I can. So it's particularly pertinent that I talk about this topic in October, which of course, as you all know, is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And I'll be particularly focusing on screening in this talk. It's important that women especially hear what I have to say about this topic. And one of the reasons, which I'll start the talk with, is that some of you may have read in the Sunday Mail back at the beginning of July, actually, not so long ago, where there was an article that appeared in the paper, and basically an MP, who some of you may know, Sarah Wollaston, made some comments about one of the technologies that I'm going to be talking about, and basically challenged it and said that it should be banned. Now, this particularly put a bee in my bonnet because it's a technology that I've been offering to women from my clinic for the last 10 years. And I believe that the reason I don't just believe, I know that I offer that technology from a point of integrity and based on science. So to that end, I wrote this article that you can see on the screen. And I'll come back to this a bit later in the evening and tell you how you can read this article for yourself. But you see, it talks about an urgent need to readdress the role of mammography in breast screening, earlier and safer detection. I wrote this article really as a response to the Sunday Mail article, which challenged some of the things that I'm going to talk about. So without further ado, I'd like to walk you through this. It is a story, but I believe it's a story that every single woman, whether she is 18 or 19, or whether she is 70 plus, it doesn't matter. It is going to impact on you, ladies, at some point in your lives. And it is important that you not only hear this, but that you, if you are impressed with everything you hear tonight and that I'm going to share with you, that you pass this on to the women who you particularly care about, your friends, your family, your mothers, your sisters, your cousins, whoever they are, because they need to hear this message. So what am I talking about? And I'm particularly focusing this evening, not so much on breast health and nutrition, which I have another talk about, but about this challenge to screening, why it affects women, why it should be addressed, and why women need to join forces in order to protect this form of screening. So let's start with this, just some facts. About 40,000 new cases of breast cancer occur in the UK each year. Your lifetime risk, if you're a woman, is about 1 in 9 in the UK of breast cancer, 1 in 8 if you're in the USA. About 11,500 deaths occur in the UK alone, and I know it's 2002 figures, but it hasn't changed very much. That means that every day 33 women in the UK will die from breast cancer. Let's think about that for a minute. Every day, 33 women in the UK will die from breast cancer. It is the commonest cancer in women in the UK. On a global scale, every 3 minutes a woman is diagnosed with breast cancer, and every 12 minutes a woman will die from it. Also, if you note the incidence in different areas of the world, there's clearly a cultural and a countrywide difference, because the highest incidence will occur in North America, and it's about 87.1 per 100,000, compared to China, which is 11.77. So clearly, there are other factors that need to be looked at. There are environmental factors that influence and impact on breast cancer risk. We'll talk about a few of those as we go on. It's estimated that we have double the treatment success if we can detect localized cancer versus metastatic. In other words, when it's a single tumor before it has spread, there's definitely an advantage to detecting breast cancer early. It gives us a treatment success opportunity that cannot be ignored. It's important to note that 30% of malignancies, breast malignancies, occur in women who are less than 50 years old. Now, I want to talk about this issue of this notion of early detection. Everybody knows that the earlier that we detect a cancer, the better is our opportunity to do something about it and to save that woman's life. And the current screening paradigm with mammography is built around early detection. All right? Well, I'm going to challenge that this evening, because I'm going to argue that mammography is not early detection. And I'm going to show you why that is the case. Let's start by talking about a little bit more about mammography. The screening really commenced much more recently than some people realize, as only 1962 was the mammographic screening program commenced. The premise of that was early detection, as I've said already. You need to note that mammography is a test of anatomy. It's a test of structure and mass. You need to have a structure in the breast which is big enough to block enough X-rays to be seen. If it's too small, it doesn't block enough X-rays, and therefore it can't be seen. Now, how big does a tumor have to be before it's visible on a mammogram or on an MRI scan or an ultrasound? Well, the answer to that is it's about 1 centimeter. So in other words, it needs to be 1 centimeter in size before it blocks enough X-rays to be seen on a mammogram. So I want you to bear that in mind. And also, I just want you to look at what I've put at the top of the slide there. Any technique for screening must have the following qualities. It must have high sensitivity for small cancers. It must be cost effective. And it must be safe and acceptable to the population being screened. So I want you to just take note of those 3 qualities that are important for any valuable screening program. Now, this is the challenge. You see, here we have the chronology of a tumor development. It starts as something very small, and then you see where that vertical line is. It's not until it gets to somewhere between 5 and 10 millimeters, 1 centimeter, that it starts to be visible by mammography and ultrasound and MRI. And of course, by self-examination, i.e. what you can feel in the breast, that it needs to be even bigger before you can feel it. So there's the challenge. And really, I would suggest we need to be detecting a tumor somewhere to the left of that dotted line instead of to the right of it. Now, some other facts that I need to run by you. And this is extremely sobering, so I want to just spend a minute on this slide explaining this. First of all, it takes about 10 years for a tumor to grow to the size of 1 centimeter, which is the size we've just said it needs to be reliably detected on a mammogram. That means that it's been there 10 years before we detect it. By that time, when it's 1 centimeter, it represents, we know, about 500 million cancer cells. We can work this out because we know that there are approximately 1 billion cancer cells in a cubic inch of breast tissue. We know that the approximate division rate of a breast cancer is about 120 days. That means that it grows, it replicates 3 times within a year. Now, I want you to also note, mid-slide, number of blood vessels supplying a tumor is proportional to the likelihood of it metastasizing. But here's the kicker. It takes 5 years from a cell becoming malignant to the time that it can actually spread. 5 years. So, if a tumor has been growing in a breast for 10 years before it can be detected, what does that mean, folks? It means that we're detecting it 5 years too late, because after about 5 years, it has the ability to spread, and we're detecting it at 5 years too late. That's what that means. It's pretty sobering, isn't it? Now, I want you to note the bottom point on this slide, and I am spending a bit longer on this slide than I will on some of the others, but for good purpose. We know, and it's well published, that when we do wide excisions of tumors that we think are single tumors as perceived on mammography, we find that within that 4 centimeters of tissue that's removed, what we thought was a single tumor on a mammogram turns out to be multifocal in 2/3 of cases. That means that 2/3 of women who we think have a single tumor turn out to have actually a tumor which is spread into the surrounding tissue, and this occurs in 2/3 of women who have this multifocal, who have this excision, this what we think is a localized excision. So basically, that's more reinforcement that when we see a single tumor, by the time we see it as a single tumor on a mammogram, already in 2/3 of women, it's spreading outside of the local area. So on the basis of all of the things that you see on this slide, we cannot reasonably argue that mammography is early detection. It is not. It is late detection. Now, I want to run by you some more facts about mammography. The evidence would support that it leads to no survival advantage, and based on what I've told you already, you can begin to understand why that's the case. I've already told you it's late detection. A third of mammograms we know give false positive readings, which means that it's saying you have something malignant when you don't. And actually a third give false negative readings, which means that it's saying you have a normal breast when actually you don't. So that's a false negative. It has low sensitivity in dense breast tissue. And of course, that's why it's pretty useless as a screening tool in young women, because young women have denser breast tissue. But actually, ladies, it's thought that 49% of all women have dense breast tissue. So where does that leave you with using mammography as a screening tool? We know that 75% of biopsies that are taken end up being negative anyway. Each mammogram increases a premenopausal woman's cancer risk by 1%. Why? Because it's ionizing radiation exposure. So young women being exposed to mammograms, i.e. ionizing radiation, is not a great thing. It's increasing your risk of breast cancer. And there's another slide I want to come back to a point on this. I'll show you in a minute. Mammography has reduced sensitivity if you're on HRT and have a family history. And of course, those two things increase your risk of breast cancer. And actually, mammography has a reduced sensitivity in those women. 10% of women with breast cancer will have a normal mammogram anyway. And there are some published concerns over the compression of existing cancers at the time of screening. For example, we know that it takes 22 pounds of pressure to rupture the capsule of a tumor. But the average pressure that a woman's breast undergoes at the time of mammography is actually about 42 pounds of pressure. So what if a woman has a tumor which she can't feel and which has not been detected previously, and she's having a mammogram which exposes her breast to that level of pressure? You see, there is some published concern over whether that can help to spread a tumor. So you see, what I'm raising on this slide are some of the real issues, some of the real concerns that we have about mammography. Now, I want you to note here, 6 to 46% of women with invasive cancer will have a negative mammogram, especially if they are young, they have dense breasts, or they have these following types of cancer, which are mucinous, lobular, or rapidly growing cancers. Well, this is just to, this is really just for fun. But I want to, it raises this issue over this compression of breasts. What effects does it have? Is it helping to spread a cancer? We don't know. It's debatable, but there are concerns. Those of you who are listening who haven't had a mammogram, this is how it's done. Your breast is compressed between two plates, and the reason for that is to flatten the tissue out. So when it's exposed to the radiation, we see more of the breast tissue. It makes it easier to see. But that's the compression that we have concerns over. For the gentlemen who are listening, just to so that we have some empathy over this screening procedure, it's amazing what you can find on the internet these days. Here's one, and here's another. So, compression is a real concern. Okay, now, some of you may not know, and some of you may. In April 2014, Switzerland became the first country to step up and take the decision to ban mammographic screening. They didn't ban mammography. It's important that I make that clear. They haven't banned mammography, but they have banned mammographic screening. I'd like to spend a few minutes explaining why they came to that decision, because it supports this notion and some of the things that where we've raised concerns over mammography already. This is why they decided to ban it. First of all, they didn't take the decision lightly. You can see there at the top, a panel of experts met and they reviewed all of the published evidence on mammograms. It took them a year to do it. And here were their conclusions, which I've put in red. The first one was, the evidence simply did not back up the global consensus of other experts in the field suggesting that mammograms were safe and capable of saving lives. They went on to say it echoes growing sentiments around the globe that mammography for breast cancer screening in asymptomatic populations no longer makes sense. Now let's go into more detail, because it's important that women understand this decision process, because this decision process is based on the concerns that those of us who know about breast screening have been reciting and echoing and expressing over the last 10 years. But they're the first country to step up and actually take the decision that they're not going to offer their women in their country mammography. Here's the first reason. First, they said the trials that support mammography are outdated. In fact, the last trial was 1991. And here was the question they raised. Could the modest benefit of mammography screening in terms of breast cancer mortality that was shown in some of the earlier trials, could that still be detected in a trial conducted today? Well, this is what they concluded when they looked at more modern trials and took all of the evidence together. The experts noted, and they were struck by how non-obvious it was that the benefits of mammography screening outweighed the harms. They also cited a more recent study published in the British Medical Journal just last year. It's one of the longest studies on mammography to date. It involved 90,000 women followed for 25 years. Not a small study, but this was the conclusion from the study. This study found that mammograms have absolutely no impact on breast cancer mortality. Absolutely no impact. And then where they went on to cite another study published the year before in the Cochrane database of systematic reviews, which also said that if you look at the evidence, they found no evidence that mammography screening has an effect on overall mortality, which taken together seriously calls into question whether mammography screening really benefits women. So you see, folks, it isn't me. I know I've been preaching this for the last 10 years, and many of you have heard me talk about this before, but it isn't just me saying it. What I'm really trying to share with you is the published evidence that now the Swiss peer review board reviewed and also came to the same conclusion, saying there's no evidence for us to support this, and therefore we're not going to offer this to our Swiss women. And there was a third concern that the Swiss raised. It's number 3 on this slide, that women's perceptions of mammography benefits do not match reality. What they meant by that is that when they screened women, women still believe that mammograms are offering much more benefit than they actually are. There is this perception amongst women that the benefits far outweigh the risks. But actually, that's not what the research shows. And what the Swiss were saying is that women are still being misguided, misled, and they're being even made to feel irresponsible if they choose not to have a mammogram. So they concluded, excuse me, they concluded that this must change, that women need to be told the truth, and they're not being. So here's a summary of what we now know about mammographic screening. What does it do and what does it not do? Well, for every breast cancer death prevented in the US in women over a 10-year course of annual screening, beginning at age 50, between 490 and 670 women are likely to have false positive mammograms with repeat examination. 70 to 100 will have an unnecessary biopsy, and 3 to 14 will be overdiagnosed with a breast cancer that would never have become clinically apparent. And that was published in the British Medical Journal in 2014. So again, recent. Now here's something that I want to also share with you listening, and especially you young ladies listening, because there is still some confusion in what women are being offered and when screening is being done and the appropriateness of screening. Let's just spend 30 seconds on this. This again was published in the British Medical Journal in 2012. It showed that women carrying this BRCA mutation, which we know increases risk of breast cancer by somewhere between 60 and 80% if you're carrying this BRCA mutation. These women are particularly sensitive to radiation. Women who carry this genetic mutation, who are exposed to diagnostic radiation, i.e. mammography, before the age of 30, have been shown to be twice as likely to develop breast cancer compared to those who did not have the mutated gene. So what does that mean? It means that if you have that gene, ladies, you should not be being offered mammography. But I want you to look at the bottom quotation. Despite these findings, the National Cancer Institute reports that some expert groups recommend women with the BRCA mutation have a mammogram every year, starting as young as age 25. I just think this is scandalous. And I think this inconsistency needs to change. Is that we know this, the data supports one thing, and we're doing another. The data doesn't support that we should still be offering women mammograms in the way that we're doing, but we're not changing it. And only the Swiss have stepped up and changed it. And again, excuse me, this is another slide which just reiterates what I've said already, but it was published on the BBC website, as you see at the top of the slide. For every 2,000 women screened in a 10-year period, 1 life would be saved, 10 healthy women would have unnecessary treatment, and at least 200 women would face psychological distress for many months because of false positive results. These are the concerns. It's being echoed from several groups now, and it's about time we paid attention to this, and women need to know this. So, for those of you who have not seen this independent film, I would strongly recommend that you get yourself a copy. It's called The Promise. It's an independent film. It's all about screening, about the status quo with mammography. It cites some of the evidence that I've already shared with you. It's a good film, and it's well worth you ladies watching this if you want some further information and some different perspectives on this. But the summary is more or less the same as what I'm sharing with you this evening. But it's well worth you looking into this. The Promise, it's called. Okay, so given what I said, it's important that we look at trying to do better than this. Because if we're detecting too late, if tumours are already spreading, I've already put forward the hypothesis and shared with you that mammography on that basis cannot be called early detection, which is what it is called. It cannot be that because we're detecting too late and 2/3 are already spread. So I've been offering medical infrared thermal imaging, or thermography as I prefer to call it, in my clinic for 10 years. And I'm going to share with you why I have been offering this. First of all, and why I believe that this has a place in screening of women's breasts, and how I think this is a game changer. I truly believe that if we incorporate this technology into the screening program for women, it will change the game. It will allow us to detect breast cancer earlier. It would allow us to do something about it sooner, and it will allow us to reduce risk. So, why am I so excited about it? Let's look at it. First of all, this is not a structural test. It uses highly specialized infrared cameras to detect heat coming from the breast tissue. So we're measuring heat, we're not looking for structure. And now modern infrared cameras are sensitive down to 0.02 to 0.25 degrees centigrade, so extremely sensitive, and we now have digital infrared, which makes the whole technology much more sensitive than it used to be. When this was first offered, we were using nitrogen-cooled cameras. Those have gone out with the arc now. We're now using digital infrared cameras, which are no bigger than 4 centimeters in length by 2 centimeters, so extremely small, but nevertheless sensitive cameras. It may surprise you to know that the FDA approved this technology to run alongside the existing screening procedures as long ago as 1982. What is thermography? Well, I would argue that it's early stage detection. The studies that have been done on it suggest that it gives women gives us as doctors who are screening a 6 to 10 year advantage over mammography, because we're looking for physiological change, heat, which precedes structural change. And because these heat changes are evident sooner than the size, than when they reach this 1 centimeter in size, clearly this gives us an early detection advantage. So we're looking for physiological change, not structural change. It's thought that an abnormal infrared image, or thermogram, is the single most important marker of high risk for developing breast cancer. Studies have shown that we can achieve a 61% increase in survival rate when thermography is combined with mammography. The studies also suggest that if you have an abnormal thermogram and it remains abnormal, it is 10 times more significant than a woman having a family history of breast cancer. It is 100% safe, risk-free. There's no radiation. You can do it in a room. It doesn't that requires no special precautions, except the room has to be cooled. It can even be used to screen pregnant women, although I would argue that's not a good time for screening the breast, because they get very engorged with preparation for breastfeeding. So it's not the best time, but it's extremely safe. Nothing goes in, no radiation. We're just detecting heat coming from the breast. It can be used for women with implants. It doesn't matter how dense the breast tissue is, because we are not looking for structure like mammography. We are looking for heat, physiological change. Therefore, it doesn't matter how dense the breast tissue is. It means we can therefore use it to screen younger women. And as you all know, women are called for mammography in UK from the time of 50 years old. Remember, I said 30% of malignancies occurring in women less than 50 years old. So it means that we're missing 30% by starting at 50 anyway. So, and the challenge then, of course, we don't want to be screening younger women with radiation, because their breasts are more sensitive to the ionizing radiation and get more damage. So here is where we have a potential win. Not only does it detect earlier, but we can use it to screen younger women too. Now, of course, I won't labor this slide too long. When we talk about risks of what are some of the things that increase risk of breast cancer, well, obviously, I've listed some of family history, of course, hormone exposure, including oral contraceptive, ladies, not just HRT, and of course, duration of use of those is important. The age at first pregnancy is important. So the older you are when you have your first pregnancy, ladies, the greater your risk of breast cancer. If you're overweight, your risk is increased. Certain ethnic groups have an increased risk. If you are black, your risk is increased. If you're a Jewish nationality, your risk is increased, for example. If you started your periods early, your risk is increased. If you've had any kind of chest trauma, this is maybe more debatable, but that it can potentially increase risk. If you've had surgery or biopsy previous, and of course emotional factors, we cannot take that off the list. Again, that one may be debatable, but clearly in some women in particular, there seem to be emotional traumas that are associated with increasing their risk. So this is what a thermogram looks like. You see different colors, and the colors represent different temperatures. What I'm showing you here is a little bit old-fashioned now because it's the manual technology that even I used to use 10 years ago. We've moved on now to use some more exciting computerized technology, which is much more sensitive, much more accurate, allows us to screen the breast in much more detail thermographically. I'll show you some examples in a minute. Okay. Now this slide also I want to labor just for a few seconds because not everyone offers thermography, this thing called dynamic thermography, which incorporates a challenge to the breast tissue. And we do that using cold. And the reason for that is it's just logical. Those of us who know about physiology, if you challenge any tissue, if the tissue is abnormal, it will not respond normal to stress. We all know that. So why should it surprise us that if we apply a stress challenge to the breast tissue, that abnormal tissue responds differently to normal tissue? It just follows what we know physiologically. So here, this is what we do. We apply a cold challenge usually by either cooling the room or having the woman hold ice cold packs. This creates an autonomic nervous system challenge, which means that blood vessels constrict. And you can see it in real time on a thermogram. Now, by the way, the square thing that you see in the top right of that woman's breast, it's an artifact. It should have been removed prior to this thermal scan. I want you to look at her other breast, because what you see after the cold challenge is there's an area in her upper outer quadrant of the left breast which does not cool. And if you look at the grayscale on the far right, you see that's an area where there is a lot of blood vessel patterning, a complex of blood vessels. They are the blood vessels that are feeding, in this particular case, an aggressive cancer. Now, if we'd not done the cold challenge, I think you can see on that first test, the unchallenged shot, we may have missed it because everything looks red. But it's only after the cold challenge we see an area which is not cooling. That's why that's important. And here, this slide shows you based on the studies, and there are several, which show that if you incorporate this dynamic thermography, you actually decrease the false positive rate to 3.5%. That means effectively the sensitivity of the test becomes something like 96.5%. So if you're decreasing the false positive rate, my view is if you can change a screening procedure to change that percentage of sensitivity, why wouldn't you do it? So I do it. I argue and still argue that adding in this dynamic thermography as a technique increases the sensitivity. It's not just me arguing it. The studies support that too. Now, of course, one of the reasons why I believe there is such a variation in reports on thermography is because people are not sticking to standardized protocols. So these are just some of them. For example, I'm not going to bore you with them so much. People who come here for a thermogram always get sent this information to tell them how to prepare to have their scan. And if they do this consistently every time that they have one, it means that the procedure is standardized, and that just makes common sense. So, for example, the room has to be temperature controlled. There must be no drafts. There must be no bright light in the room. There must be standardized preparation, no vigorous exercise, including no sex on the morning of having a scan, no breast rubbing, no massage, no caffeine even. If you're a smoker, no smoking on the day. This has to be standardized so that every time a woman has a scan, this procedure is followed. The camera technology, as I said earlier, has advanced significantly. We now have digital infrared and computerized technology, and asking a computer to analyze the images once we've captured them has increased the sensitivity of the whole way that we do this. And I'm pleased to say I'll the technology that I use, I've actually been responsible for co-developing it, and it's based on 10 years of doing this in my own clinics. So what we look for, and again, this is really not so important to know, except that we look at different temperatures at different parts of the breast. We analyze that, the computer does it, and also we look at abnormal blood vessel patterns. So not only are we looking for heat changes, we're looking for changes in vascular patterns as well, and that also adds to the sensitivity of the test. Okay, well, obvious question is, has it been scientifically validated? Well, I can tell you, there are over 1,000 peer-reviewed studies in the scientific literature on breast thermography, and some of these have followed women for over 12 years, some big studies. I want to share just a couple of these. I don't have time to go over all of them, and in fact, not most of them, but some of them are in the reference that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. I'll come back to at the end and tell you how you can access that reference. But here's one of the big studies. Spitalier and co. Published in the 80s, screened 61,000 women using thermography over a 10-year period. He found from his study 91% of cancers that could not be felt were detected by thermography. The authors also noted patients having no clinical or radiographic suspicion, that means on a mammogram, no radiographic suspicion of malignancy. A persistently abnormal breast thermogram represents the highest known risk factor for the future development of breast cancer. That means, ladies, if you have an abnormal thermal scan and it remains abnormal 6 months later and it still remains abnormal, you're at risk. And the good news is that we know now some of the things to change risk. So it doesn't mean that we're just doing thermograms and then allowing women to just be sitting ducks to something that may occur a few years later or 10 years down the line. There are ways that risk can be changed. I won't be focusing so much on that tonight. I will share a couple of things about this just to give you some idea. But the purpose of tonight is to talk about screening. Here's another study, again published in the 80s. But look how big a study it was. 58,000 women screened with thermography. And they followed a group of these women who were 1,500 or so women with initially healthy breasts, but they had abnormal thermograms. So in other words, there was nothing to feel clinically, but they had abnormal thermograms. Of this group, here's the point, of this group, 40% of these women that had abnormal thermograms but normal breast to feel developed malignancies within 5 years. In other words, developed breast cancers within 5 years. The study concluded, again, abnormal thermogram is the single most important marker of high risk of future development of breast cancer. So if we look at all of the studies together, how sensitive is this technology? And the answer is, and I've just summarized on this slide just 8 studies, the average sensitivity is about 90%. Mammography is about 70%. So that gives you a comparator. Sensitivity means if you have a problem, the test says and confirms you have a problem. It's a true positive. That's sensitivity. It's also important to note, I'll skip over that, because that slide here just shows you a more recent study published, I think this was in 2008 actually, but if you read my paper, there are some even more recent ones than this, again showing 97% sensitivity of thermography for detecting breast cancer. And here, what about specificity? What's that? It means that if a woman has a normal scan, a normal thermogram, how confident can we be that it truly is normal? In other words, it's a true negative. It's a bit different than a true positive. But look at how thermography stands up. It's about 91.9%, so 90% again. And remember I told you earlier that mammography is about 70%. So just for a comparison, you can see how they fare. Okay, some other points. Well, there's some people talk about, well, thermography has high false positive. Well, if you start to talk about false positive, what does that mean? It means that you must really screen a woman for 10 years to know if it truly is a false positive or not. Because I've already showed you that 40% of women who have normal breasts clinically but have an abnormal thermal scan will develop breast cancer within 5 years, while their thermogram is remaining abnormal. So in other words, it's a marker of high risk. We cannot ignore women who have abnormal thermograms. I might skip over this, folks, because this is more for people who are offering thermography. I'm going to just skip over for the sake of time. What are some of the limitations of thermography? Well, it doesn't localize a lesion. And what that means is that if you have a hot spot, it doesn't mean that if you have a cancer, that it's exactly below where that hot spot is. What we do is we take into account all of the temperature changes in the breast. Are there any abnormal vascular patterns? Is there any resistance to cooling? And we equate risk based on all of those things taken together. A low metabolic cold tumor may not show. Sure. Remember, I just showed you that it's not 100%. So there are some women who will have a thermal scan and it will not pick up their malignancy. But that doesn't mean we have to throw it out of the window. I wish it was 100%. It is not. But the technology and the science so far shows that it's up at 90%. And that's a great comparison with the structural screening that we're currently offering women. It does not detect microcalcifications either. Only mammography does that. Let me show you some examples of thermal scans. I'm going to show you two normals first. And what you can see looking at this is that the breasts are symmetrically cool. They're normal. It's normal to have heat under the breasts as you see it around the neck. That's normal. And you see the gray scale, which is also a thermal scan on the right. This is a normal scan. Here's another normal one. And you see again, symmetry, heat where it should be, but not in the breast tissue. On the right side, no abnormal vascular patterns. Now, I know I'm hardly going to have to say a word about the next three. The next three are examples of women who have breast cancer. And I just want to show you what their thermal scan looks like. Here's the first one. Now, even if you have no idea about thermography, I think you can see immediately that there is a gross asymmetry. In this case, it's the woman's left breast. She has a breast cancer. You notice that the heat coming from that breast, but you notice also the vascular asymmetry that there is as well. Now, here's another one. Again, diagnosed breast cancer. You can see there is an asymmetry in structure because the nipple is raised on her left side. Look at the intense vascular patterning. Look at the heat that is coming from that breast cancer. Known breast cancer generating heat. And here's the third and final example. This time it's on the other side. Look at the heat. Look at the aggressive, abnormal vascular patterning that we're seeing. 3 women with known breast cancer showing you cancers generate heat and have abnormal nurturing blood vessels. We're just saying we need to monitor these temperature changes much sooner to give us an advantage. That's what thermography gives us a chance to do. Here's an example of someone before and after. It's a 49-year-old woman who, as you see on the slide, was given a depot progesterone injection 6 months prior to the changes we're about to see on her thermogram. She had had breast augmentation, but these had to be replaced because she had blunt trauma to the chest, so they had to remove the implant. A mammogram 4 years ago was normal. So let's skip to the slide. Here you see her, the top left. You can see, even at this early stage in 2012, that there's an asymmetry. The left breast does not look like the right. But 6 months later, things have hotted up on both sides, and where you see the red in the upper part of her left breast, and you're looking as if looking in a mirror, she was sent for an MRI, which showed that she had 2 small lumps in the breast, and in fact, in this case, exactly where that thermal flare was. She didn't want to have a biopsy, so we don't know if they were malignant or not. If you look on the right, on the far right at the top, you see there's some abnormal blood vessel patterning in that same area. Now, same woman, look at the bottom. Same woman, 6 months later. She's gone from high risk to low risk. Look at the vascular patterning 6 months later. Also, it's dissipated. So we don't know if this woman had breast cancer or not, but what we can say, here's a woman who was at high risk, who we made low risk 6 months later. And you're all thinking, how did we do that? Well, I'm going to share some of the things that we did that changed this risk. And this is what this is about. It's not just screening women, it's detecting early, it's detecting risk earlier, and it is empowering women with some simple lifestyle changes, nutritional things that they can do, correcting their vitamin D if they're low, that will impact on her risk over time and actually make the changes that we see on the thermogram. Totally empowering to women. It gives us that opportunity, folks. So, excuse me. As I mentioned a bit earlier, and I'm coming to the end of my talk, I've been the co-developer of a new technology in thermography where we employ computer technology to look at the breast. It's better than the human eye, and there are still some people offering thermography where they send the images to a doctor in the States who eyeballs it, manually interprets the scan. I used to do that myself, but it's old technology. With this new technology that we have now, we tell the computer to analyze the breast in the way that you see. We draw a mesh that you see, as in this slide, around the breast. We tell the computer to analyze all of those 32 subquadrants, the nipple and areola, both sides. We compare left against right of those same subquadrants, and then we also tell the computer to compare the same breast against itself before and after cooling. So it makes this whole thing much more technological, brings it up to date. We don't miss any area of breast tissue, which might be showing subtle changes that we would miss otherwise. Here you see we still look at the vascular patterns to see if they're abnormal. We even tell the computer to scrutinize any area where there's a lump or thickening or physical changes in order to make sure that there are absolutely no thermal changes in an area where we have some clinical concern. So all of this has advanced the technology another level. The technology automatically creates these heat maps that allow the doctor to see instantaneously where there are any temperature changes and whether or not they cool after the cold challenge. And that's what you're seeing on this scan. I don't want to bore you with this, folks. It's really the technical detail. It's just showing you how the technology is advanced. And again, this is more showing you the same technology. It's not important to dwell on this, so I'm going to skip over it. So in the last part of my talk, which is the last 5 minutes, I just want to share with you how this can become empowering. Because if you have a woman who has an abnormal thermal scan, and let's say you send her for a mammogram or an ultrasound if she's younger, or an MRI if she's if she's a young woman, and let's say the structural scan comes back normal. Now, given what I've shared with you this evening, you will see the problem with that. We can't sign that woman off and say she doesn't have a problem because the structural scan is normal, because I've already shared with you it needs to be a centimeter before it shows on the structural scan. So suppose we've got a developing tumor there and that abnormal thermal scan is telling us that. I do not believe we should sit on that woman and just do nothing. What we must do is identify risk factors in that woman's lifestyle, nutritional risks that are leading that woman to have an increased risk of breast cancer, and change that. We now know that genes, even if you have a genetic risk, ladies, genes aren't written in stone. They don't turn themselves on and off. There's this thing called epigenetics or nutrigenomics, whereby if you put the genes into the right environment, if you put the right nutrients in, we know that some of these key nutrients can turn genes on and off, can help us to detoxify better. I'm going to show you an example of that in a second. So let's look at this. This is totally empowering. Women are still not being told that they can reduce their risk of breast cancer by just making sure that their vitamin D levels are not deficient or insufficient. Look at these. I've just put 2 studies here. I've got a whole paper on this if any of you are interested. If you are, just send me an email. I'll give you the email address at the end. Quite happy to send you a PDF of the paper on this. It gives you more detail. But look at these 2 studies. The first one at St. George's Hospital, London, Women with low levels of vitamin D in their breast tissue have 354% greater risk of breast cancer. That is 4.5 times the risk of breast cancer. Why aren't women being told this? Look at the second study, Creighton University, published 2007, showed that women over the age of 55 who took 1,100 units of vitamin D3 with calcium in this particular study, they were followed for 4 years. The study reported that even by 1 year, they had a highly significant 75% reduction in breast cancer diagnosed after the first 12 months compared with women who took a placebo. This is highly significant, ladies. It's a simple thing that can be changed, that will empower breast health. I bang on about it. I keep talking about it. It seems sometimes that nobody is listening. But listen, what I want you to do is share this information with those you care about, because this is about empowering women, not only to how they can detect breast cancer early, non-invasively, not using ionizing radiation, how we can screen young women, but also how we can subsequently empower women that have an abnormal thermal scan to reduce their risk over the ensuing months so that she no longer has that same risk. And that has got to be worth talking about. Here's another example, and I'm not going to share many more with you because I don't have the time. This is more about the screening technology that I'm focusing on today. Here shows you how women metabolize estrogen. Now, you might wonder, why am I talking about this? Well, we know that estrogen increases risk of breast cancer in some women, not all. And this is one of the reasons why, that again, doctors are not talking about and should be. All women will break down estrogen in 2 main pathways that are shown on this slide. At the top 2, going across horizontally, the 2-hydroxyestrogens are safe, excreted in urine, they're not damaging to breast or uterine tissue. But the 16 and 4-hydroxy are potentially damaging and are carcinogenic. Now, all women will produce a proportion of both of these. It's just the way it is. But if a woman produces toxic estrogens more than the others, and the proportion is wrong, that's a woman who's at increased risk. Now, those are women we shouldn't be giving HRT to. Those are women, arguably, who shouldn't be on the pill. But this test is never offered to women, and it's such a simple urine test that is available commercially. And I do it on all of my women, especially if they're concerned about breast cancer. It's part of my breast health panel, which I don't even have time to talk about this evening. But it's one of the tests that becomes empowering to women. Because the good news is this: even if you are a toxic estrogen producer, if you flood your system with the cruciferous vegetables, so the crucifers are broccoli, kale, cabbage, cauliflower, or you take a supplement that contains them, what it does is it reprograms the body so that estrogen is pushed down the safe pathway and not the toxic pathway. And this is an example of how nutrient interacts with genes and changes gene expression. And in this case, it's another way of removing risk from a woman who may be at risk because of this toxic profile that she may have. If it's not tested, how would you know? And this slide just shows you that. It's well published. It's not just me saying it. What you see in the top left is the normal tissue around a breast cancer. It's the same woman. Look at the staining, the dark red staining of toxic estrogens that is found in the breast cancer tissue, but not in the surrounding normal tissue. And that's what we're talking about. Nobody's saying it's causal, but there's definitely an association, and it's definitely one of the things that increases women's risk. And it's one of the things that can be changed. It can be changed nutritionally. So, in summary, what have I said? I've said basically there is no perfect screening tool. Nothing is 100%. The evidence around mammography suggests that it is of doubtful merit as a screening tool. It may lead to overtreatment, and it's on the basis of all of this evidence that Switzerland banned it as a screening tool in April 2014. I would argue, based on what I've said, that we have an opportunity to detect earlier using thermography. It has a potential role in earlier detection of breast cancer. Since we're looking at physiology, we're not looking for structural change. It is important that there is adherence to defined protocols, and that will help us to maintain consistency and reliability around this technology. We've added now computerized analytics, which allows us to make the whole technology even more accurate. Thermography gives us the best opportunity to remove a woman from being high risk to low risk. And I've just shared a couple of ways that we can do that by changing nutrition and changing vitamin D levels. Altering lifestyle, nutrient levels that have an impact on breast tissue health. And that's what we're talking about. So I want to come back to this in closing. It's the article that I've written. Now, how can you access this? For those of you who are listening in this evening, and you may have friends who won't listen to the webinar, but you'd like to pass this information, let me tell you, most of what I shared with you this evening is in this article. How do you get this article? Well, it's very easy. You just log on to our website, which is thenaturaldoctor.org, and right on our homepage, you'll see a video, a very short video, which is me introducing why I wrote the article in the first place. And then right underneath that, you just click to download the article. It takes you straight to the page where you can read and print off that article if you want to. So all I'm wishing is that if you feel this has been empowering to you listening to this and you want to pass this on, then all you have to do is either get people to listen to the webinar recording or go to our website and get them to download this article, let them read what I've spoken about for themselves. So all it remains for me to say, folks, is thank you for listening in this evening. I hope you've appreciated what I've shared with you. I hope that this information truly becomes empowering to you as a listener in Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And not only you, but as you pass this on, that empowerment just cascades and ripples through those people that you care about, those ladies, your friends, your relatives, your mothers, your sisters. Let them be empowered by this information. Thank you for listening. God bless you all. I will just say one final thing, because I haven't had time to take any questions. But any of you who may have questions about this, by all means, using the same email that I just shared with you, or really, if you go on our website, our email actually is info@thenaturaldoctor.org. If you send me an email, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have about it. So thank you again for listening. God bless. Hopefully talk to you again soon. Take care now.